2 for 1 check, splat, just like that. Bringing you tons of information, that's where he's at. He goes around town covering topics you'd like to know. Well, that's what you get when you tune in to the...
Yep, that's what's up. Yeah, you know, that's what's up. Yeah, that's what's up. Yeah, CO ballin' up. Yep, that's what's up. It's going down right now, you know, that's what's up. Like the hottest meltdown, you know that.
So everybody doing all right? Yes, sir. All right. All right, what are we talking about?
Is it open for questions?
What about the elephant in the room?
Huh?
What about the elephant in the room? Not me. I'm not elephant.
You're not the elephant?
I'm big. I'm more of a gorilla. But anyway, what about, well, a solution? Because there's no sense of trying to refry egg. I mean, the housing market here, where it's become that we grew up here, most of us are natives here, and you can't afford to live in the same neighborhood that you grew up in.
Right.
And I just came back from Bermuda, so a solution is, in Bermuda they have almost a rate ceiling out how much you can get charged as a Bermudan. Maybe the same thing can happen for us as rent control as a Bermudan. Maybe the same thing can happen for us natives. You know, so we can afford to go to the movies and out to eat and whatnot.
So you need some discretionary dollars available. How many of y'all are natives of Denver? So for the folks who can see it, most of the people in the room raising their hand. Jay Berry raised his hand, but I know he grew up in northern metro area.
I get my hair cut down here.
Yeah. When you had hair. I know. You know, the housing question is a great question. What you talk about rent control, and the reality, if you look at rent control across this country, it is a very, very short-term solution. What it results in, though, it's not a long-term solution. It tends to result in the opposite effect that you're trying to impact. The people who need to benefit from it the most typically do not. And so that's part of the challenge. In Denver, we have grown by 110,000 people in the last 10 years. We were at one point growing at 1,000 people per month into Denver, Colorado. You don't grow at that clip and not run into the basic economic question of supply versus demand. Our supply did not keep pace with the demand in terms of housing. And we all know the very basic 101 question with the economics is when you have demand outstripping supply, particularly at that rate, what happens? You got a spike. Let me also remind us the situation that we are dealing with is also the result of the foreclosure crisis that hit. Because when our spike hit, our growth hit, which is about 2011, 2012, when we started growing as a city, we still had a lot of people who had lost their homes during the foreclosure crisis for a variety of reasons, predatory lending being the leading cause, who were sitting in apartments. They had once owned their property, but now they were sitting in apartments. And so you got this growth happening, and you got former homeowners sitting in apartments. So the supply wasn't there, and we saw prices started going up, and that's why you also saw this amazing development of apartments all over Denver, Colorado. The best way to answer our question about affordable housing, affordability in Denver, is production. We got to get production up. Over the last 8 years as the mayor of the city, actually 6, I have funded the building of 6,000 affordable housing units in Denver. In 2016, I committed $150 million to expedite to do even more. The moment I signed that bill, I said, we got to keep looking at this. It's not enough, not with the growth that we're seeing. And so we went back into the laboratory, kept looking at things, and so I raised taxes on marijuana and turned to a housing partner and said, I need you to issue some bonds, I need to expedite this, and if you do that, I'll double my commitment to $300 million. So over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to do 6,400 instead of over 8 years of affordable housing units. At the same time, we're going to start buying land around the city that we're going to use to put underneath home builders so that they can build housing. And so we're going to really be surging the market with land purchases as well as building of housing and land trusts. To me, and everything I've ever read, that is the best way to combat the challenge of affordability in cities, as opposed to rent control, which is a single solution. You've got to have a multi-pronged approach to it. The other thing is, we got to raise wages.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
In America, we have faced 4 decades of stagnation of wages. I had a conversation with former Vice President Joe Biden, and he said to me, he was Vice President time, he said the greatest threat to America is wage stagnation. And we think that the challenges of protest and frustration of people is just connected. Let's just be clear, it's not just connected to the race and justice issues and officers misbehaving. It's also the frustration that we as a people feel we're not getting along, moving along in this society, in this economy. And so we've got to unleash the power. Over the last 4 decades, the gap has gotten wider between the haves and the have-nots. The top 1% owns 90% of all wealth in this nation. That has to be, it's unacceptable, and we've got to change it. So that's why I moved to push for the ability to raise wages in Denver, Colorado. We got to get people to a livable wage in the city.
Can you clarify what is land trust, and also when you say affordable housing, what does that look like? Like, I was lucky to get back in my neighborhood, in the Cole Rhino area, to get an affordable housing townhome, so I'm very grateful for that. But what does that look like for the average income? Because these houses that they're building, they're running like $400,000 to $500,000. And also, why is there a land lease on the land? Why are people not owning the land under their house?
Well, that's really between the seller and our developer and the resident. One of the reasons why it might be land leases is they might think that there's some minerals underneath that land that could be valuable someday. So people try to hold on to the mineral rights, but I don't know much about why they do that. But if I'm buying land, you better believe I want the land with my purchase of my home. So I don't have to do this deal, and I won't, because that's the most valuable piece you have. It's not the structure, but the land it sits on. And so the real issue in our housing market is not the new builds in terms of the single family homes. It's really the fact that, as I saw yesterday, I grew up, most of my formative years were spent at 28th and Humboldt, 1485 East 28th Avenue Public Housing. Right around the corner where my boys and their families lived, on 28th and Lafayette. I think I heard at 27th or 26th and Lafayette, there was a home for sale for $1.2 million.
Wow.
Wow.
Man, my friends were in the same boat that I was on. If I didn't have food, they did. If they didn't have food, I had. I mean, we all had our electricity turned off many a times. But that's how we thought. We all lived. That was just part of the living over there. So to hear in that Whittier neighborhood, right around the corner of Emmanuel High School, that is a $1.2 million home. That's what, to me, is the biggest threat to what we're talking about, affordability, right?
Exactly.
And that's what's driven displacement. That's what's driven gentrification. But to your point around affordability, to me, it's relative. We are trying to not only impact those who are on the lowest end of the income scale of 30% to 60% area median income, which today, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, what that would mean for a family of 4. But we're also trying to impact people who work hard every day. Not to say people in lower income don't, but I'm talking about people who are workforce housing. People who are going to work doing 40 hours a week, 45, 50 hours a week. How many of you am I talking about in this room? Raise your hand. But who are saying, I'm having a hard time affording this space, or my life here. And so that's the workforce housing. So it's that 30% AMI all the way up to 120% AMI. And we're actually trying to do even more up in that area. Those are your teachers, your police officers, as many of us in this room, your barbers, we're targeting with those housing.
What areas are you trying to?
All over. You know, the day of concentrated, affordable housing, attainable housing are over. I think we ought to be buying land all over the city of Denver. And I told my partners, the city partners, that when we buy this land all over the city, we're going to do it all over the city. We're not just going to concentrate in Cole. We're not going to just concentrate in 5 Points. We're going to be all over the city, making sure people can live where they want to live.
And will the residents have a voice in with the developers at the table when they started making these developments for these affordable houses? So,
yeah, I mean,
so they're just not giving them a townhome. Maybe they can get an actual home instead of a clear home or something of that nature.
We'll have a diversity of developers. Some who are building multi-family housing, and some who are building single-family housing.
Why was it important to create an urban camping ban, which many of us believe criminalizes homelessness? And then, do you support Proposition 300 to address that? And if not, what are your arguments for not supporting Proposition 300?
Absolutely. In 2011, when I was elected mayor, we all might recall there was an Occupy Denver movement that was going on in the city. In Denver, we have laws that do not allow you to obstruct public right away, do not allow you to be in our parks. We have curfews in our parks after 11. I found that out at age 16 when I was hanging out at the park after 11 o'clock and got ticketed. Probably several of you got that as well here in Denver, Colorado. It's a long, old law in Denver. When Occupy Denver was active in our city, they came to see me in my office and they said, "We're taking over your parks." And I remember telling them very clearly, you're not taking over, you're welcome to be in our parks from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. But at 11 p.m. you must leave just like everybody else, because that's when we go in and clean our parks, that's when we recondition the parks and get them ready for the next day. And you might recall, we didn't have the same situations that a lot of other cities had in terms of the major showdowns, but we had some situations where police had to move in and they tried to fight the police, and we had a few moments with that situation. The reality is I come from an activist background. I get what they stood for, but at the end of the day, there are laws and there are rules for a reason. City Council came to me and said we want to develop this urban camping legislation, and it just basically honored the laws that we had and said we're not going to allow for people to camp out in our city. Urban play spaces are not appropriate for folks to camp out. It's not safe, it's not healthy, and it's not sanitary. Not just for the homeless, but all of us, the general public. And so to answer your question, that's where the urban camping ban came from. I did support it. I signed the legislation. I do not support 300. I find nothing compassionate about encouraging people to sleep outdoors. It's not safe. It's not sanitary. It's not healthy. And there's nothing compassionate about saying, go out there and sleep in this weather. Be outside. During the cyclone bomb, we had to go out and rescue 1,000 people trying to stay outside. They would have died in that blizzard that just came through here. We moved them indoors. And the reality is that the city supplies or provides, in partnership with a lot of service providers, over $50 million worth of services on an annual basis. I've opened up 3 shelters since I've been mayor. We have emergency shelters. We open up our rec centers if necessary when we have overflow situations. We have mental health services. We have drug and alcohol addiction services. We are providing these services along the continuum of service for people who are homeless in our city. And so if you go to cities like Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and you see the results of urban camping enabling, you'll find that it does not serve the homeless, it doesn't move the needle, it doesn't help them, it enables them, and it ends up adversely impacting the entire city. Today, I spent an hour touring downtown Los Angeles, and they have tens of thousands of people camping out in downtown Los Angeles. I saw some third world conditions. I don't find that compassionate for our homeless, and that is not something I want to see in the city of Denver.
But just a quick follow-up.
Yep.
So are you saying that people are outside because they choose or they want to be, and how does that jive with people say that many of our homeless are working 1 and 2 jobs?
Yeah.
They're actually working, and then we've got estimates upwards of 233 people who have died in our city based on homelessness. How compassionate is it when you have actual deaths? No one is talking about 233 lives that have been lost.
Absolutely. Jeff, I think it's important for us to keep everything in perspective. While 233 is a tragedy, I think 1 is too high. I think we got to keep it in perspective. You don't grow by 100,000 people and don't expect that your homeless population will increase at some point. You don't have 45 to 50% of our homeless suffering from some form of behavioral health challenge, mental health, drug and alcohol abuse, and not experience an increase in homelessness. And the reality is, when you tell me 233 people, I'm going to challenge you to give me the deeper number, or at least the statistics there. how did they die? Was it because they were homeless, or because they were, we are also seeing 200 overdoses a year in the city of Denver because of the opiate and methamphetamine epidemic that's not only hit Denver, Colorado, but it's hit this entire nation. And so we can play games with numbers all day, but we all also have to ask the academic question of, break it down for me. Was it because someone's sleeping outside? The reality is very few people are dying because of hypothermia. They're dying because of other causes. 3 people sleeping outside in downtown Denver get shot because someone walks up on them, shoots them. 200 deaths that are occurring due to methamphetamines and opiates in Denver, Colorado. Those are things that are contributing to this, and I'm not putting aside 233. 1 death is too many. But these are not issues that you got to point to the city and say, that's your call. We're doing everything we can to put people in shelter and get them the services. Every night we see 300 to 400 beds empty in our shelters, and vouchers not going used. We have outreach workers out there trying to bring them in. Some people do choose to stay outside. They'll tell you, I don't want to go indoors. They'll tell you they feel safer. They'll tell you that, you know, I got a partner, I can't go in with my partner. I've got a dog, I can't take my dog in. And so we are looking at removing some of those barriers, so we have shelters that are much more nimble and flexible to allow for you to bring your partner in, for you to bring your dog in, and we can properly store your stuff. All of these are contributing factors of why people are out on our streets. But let me tell you, we typically have enough beds for people every night in the city.
So I know you mentioned about affordable housing and increasing workforce wages. What does your agenda look like if you were the mayor for the next 4 years?
Yes.
What are you planning to do, and what do you want to tackle and be your priority in the first couple of years?
I appreciate that. What we're doing, our agenda is already set. We're moving forward. I put $300 million of affordable housing on the table. Last year we spent $50 million on affordable housing. This year we're set to spend $60 million. That's going to continue to escalate. We're implementing our strategy. I've got 1,200 housing units under construction right now. We got 1,000 going through the pipeline that will be under construction by the end of this year. The goal is to continue to ramp up those numbers. Again, it's about supply. I'm trying to expedite production of decent, affordable housing in this city. You'll see us move to also work to, and we're already working on this, develop an additional pot of money that will focus more on that attainable workforce housing going forward. Those people who are 60% to 100% AMI in the city of Denver. Many of us, if not all of us in this room, meet that standard. And so we're talking about us when I say those numbers. And so you're going to see us do that on the housing piece. You're going to see us buying land. You're going to see us putting covenants on this land. And by the way, we changed the law. When we built affordable housing, it used to be 20, then we moved it to 40 years restriction. Now it's up to 60 years. It will remain affordable for up to 60 years. So we're talking 3 generations of families that can have access to affordable housing. Under mobility, I gotta tell you, we don't talk about this enough, but mobility is one of the biggest detriments to low-income people. If people are locked in an area, if people are locked there, they can't access better nutrition, schools. We've got to make sure this city deploys the $2 billion that I committed to mobility to make sure we create equity around the city of Denver. It's an equity lens that I'm pushing mobility. And people need to have access to, bike network, sidewalks, but also good transit. That's important. So what you're going to see is me blend housing and mobility together. We're going to build condos and apartments at TODs around the city of Denver. I have a niece who lives on 4th in Colorado. She said, "Uncle, you have no idea the difference this has made in my life. I got 3 kids, I come downstairs, we get on that train, I take them to school, I get back on the train, and I go to work." Reverse that during the day. She said, "But what I don't have to worry about is a car, insurance, fuel, and as a single mother, that has made all the difference for our quality of life." It levels the playing field when you have access to convenient, affordable mobility options. And so that's what we're working on. You bet. In the back. What's up, man?
So, couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
One, businesses with people of color.
Yeah.
That's all. Tell me about what you see, or the trend that you've seen, with regard to how that has increased, decreased, struggles that they've had to actually own businesses and to be viable competitors in this economy.
Yeah.
Secondly, fill off, what are your top, if you would, 2 or 3 pieces of your next run? Should you be elected? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Top priority.
I appreciate that. And with regards to businesses,
Please.
so I appreciate that. So in Denver, we have seen an expansion of businesses in our city. In fact, over the last 8 years since I've been mayor, we've seen 8,100 businesses come to Denver, Colorado, or start in Denver. Those 8,100 companies have actually driven our economic recovery and have had Denver growing like crazy in terms of our economic vibrancy. In fact, they created over 100,000 jobs in the city of Denver. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country because of that growth. Here's where our challenge is. While many of us, particularly in the African American community and other communities of color, start businesses, we don't have the access to capital. We don't have the same access to customers. And we don't have the same access to technical support services to help our companies grow. We have seen a model grow around the country. We have a few in Denver, but when I walk in there, we're not in there. African Americans are not there. These are these innovation centers. We know them better as incubation centers, right? Incubators. And so we're already working on how we establish those type of innovation centers in the African American community, or where they're more easily accessible to African Americans. Through the Office of Economic Development, we have now contracted with a couple of African American business consulting experts who are working targeting certain demographics of the African American community as well as the Latino community to help people with the technical assistance around the development and the moving of their businesses forward. On the back end, we're also talking to banks about how we can help these small business and entrepreneurs access pools of capital that are beyond just the $5,000 token contributions, but to really hit their CRA, the community reinvestment dollars, and help these small minority businesses really access capital to move their businesses forward. We've learned a lot about how small businesses grow over the last 8 years because we've seen some of them grow and do very well. Now we got to see if how we duplicate that in communities underserved, parentally neglected communities that typically don't have access to those services. But the first step is how do we get you the technical assistance to help you form your business properly, get the paperwork done, get your licensing taken care of, and then begin the process of developing your products and services and accessing capital so you can move forward. So those are the top challenges, and customers and business will tell you, small business will tell you, access to customers is our biggest challenge. And so we've got a concierge business in the city of Denver helping people do that. But if you don't know about it, it's not going to help you. And so that's what these consultants are designed to help, is to bring in those services and make sure you're aware of them. About a month ago, one of our consultants conducted an African American female summit. And she invited me to come and speak and to kick it off. And I got to tell you, I walked in on Saturday morning. Sandra, you were there. It was standing room only. Actually, there was a waiting room, a waiting list to get in. So there's a demand, and these sisters that were there have some unbelievable concepts. They just don't have how do I get to that capital? How do I get to those customers? And that's what we're trying to help people do, to grow that. And I'm excited that in my third term, we're going to see 1 or 2 of these innovation centers take off, and we're going to see, hopefully, some of our businesses begin to rise. If I could just share a story about how we begin to duplicate this and take it to our community. First, I got to tell you, I have not been pleased with how African American businesses have not received access to doing business with the city of Denver. The disparity studies under my leadership have shown we have fallen woefully short, and it's just absolutely unacceptable. So we're looking at different unique models. How do we prepare businesses to do it with us, but how do we also set a bureaucracy up to look to make sure and hold people accountable to do business with the city of Denver? We're a $2 billion operation. We should be able to help people in this time to access our business opportunities. There was a company that was operating they had just moved to Denver when I became mayor in 2011. They had 3 employees, pretty cool concept, and they entered into one of our city business plan competitions that we developed trying to find those needles in a haystack. They won one of the business competitions. We gave them $50,000 worth of technical assistance, and we gave them introduction to venture capitalists and all that good stuff. My administration was the first administration to hold a venture capital roundtable to introduce entrepreneurs to venture capitalists. The myth was that venture capitalists would not invest in small businesses in Denver.
For these affordable houses?
Yeah, Mike, you hear the question? She's asking about, as we're doing housing, are we also looking at sustainability stuff like electrification and solar panels and things of that nature? And I can't tell you that we are looking at that stuff because that stuff ends up driving housing up. I mean, if we can get it up there without, huh?
They came with the solar installation, so I
So,
just want to know,
wonderful.
and this was affordable.
If you have it, yeah.
Make sure this is something that developers are going to be looking for,
Yeah.
especially if we're expanding
Yeah.
and it's getting busier and
Right.
people are starting to transition from gas to electronic vehicles. We need these charging stations, and
I
they're
love
also
it.
going to be implemented with low-income housing
Yeah.
as well. Is that something that might be on your agenda for future?
Sustainability around our housing. I was saying I don't know. I'm not sure that solars are part of it. I'm glad to hear that someone built solar panels on their home, on your unit, Ms. Muhammad. The electrification and the charging station or charging units in houses and things of that nature. We have seen that done. You know who's doing a lot of that? Denver Housing Authority.
Yeah, I work with them. I work
Boom.
with alternatives.
Yeah, so you walk in some of their units and they are some of the most energy efficient units I've ever seen. I mean, electric. I was blown away by what they were doing, and they still keep them affordable.
Right.
Because of what we're doing, I think we have an opportunity to do some real creative things. And in the long term, if we have electric charging stations, if we've got solar panels on your unit, we're helping you stay in that unit longer and make it more affordable in the long run.
Right.
So we certainly get that. So I can't say that that's what they're planning right now in terms of solar panels, but I can tell you high efficient units with high efficient appliances are the target of what we're doing in our units.
Are you using affordable housing and public housing, low income housing synonymously? And then is there a role for public housing such as the projects that are being torn down?
Yeah.
What role for those families?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jeff. No, we're not using them synonymously. We're saying affordable, attainable, which is more of your workforce housing. And then as you point out, you have that 0 to 30, which is more of your public housing. I grew up in public housing. The public housing, the Denver Housing Authority, that's chiefly their inventory, but it is changing. You see, to your point, where they are demolishing the old models that we grew up in, Sun Valley, North Lincoln Park Home, South Lincoln Park Home, Curtis Park. Those are the projects that used to be projects coming down. They're becoming development. They're mixed income developments. And so those people living there may be 0 to 60 to 80% AMI. The difference is you will not know a public housing unit from a market rate unit in those units. I mean, they're building them all, and they're subsidizing all of them. And I think that's the power. The days of concentrated poverty are over. You don't see Cabrini Green anymore in Chicago, and you won't see a Curtis Park as we knew it growing up anymore either. And to me, that's about how you build people up and give them a sense of pride where they live, and not identifying them that those are your public housing people.
I got a quick question.
Yeah, I'll let you be last.
What is your current stance on?
One more? All right, we'll make them quick. How are we doing on time?
You have one more question.
All right, we'll make it quick.
What is your current stance on the public school system versus some of the charter schools, a lot of the charter schools that are popping up?
Yeah, you know what? I think we ought to, first of all, treat our private schools, our charter schools the same way we treat our public schools in terms of their performance. And if they're not getting the outcomes, the outputs that we want from them in terms of our kids coming out prepared and they're meeting the mark, we ought to.
It's 2 for 1 Jack, splat, just like that. Bringing you tons of information, that's where he's at. He goes around town covering topics you'd like to know. Well, that's what you get when you tune in to the 2 for 1 Jack Show.